No one in Miller's Creek went near the burned barn after dark. They said the fire had taken everything years ago, the hay, the tools, the animals, and the family who once believed that farm could be saved. By the time Caleb Turner found it, the barn was nothing but black boards, sagging beams, and a smell of rain trapped in old ashes. But Caleb was not looking for ghosts. He was looking for somewhere the wind could not reach him. At 11 years old, he had already learned that a house could be full of people and still have no room for a child. His foster family had made that clear one supper at a time, one locked pantry door at a time. When he finally left, he carried no money, no coat thick enough for the night, and no plan beyond walking until no one could tell him to leave again. That was when he saw it. Behind the burned barn, half hidden by weeds, stood a broken stall door tied shut with old rope. From behind it came a sound so small, Caleb almost thought the wind had made it. Then it came again. A living sound. Caleb pulled the rope loose with shaking fingers. What he found inside should have died long before he arrived. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe and leave a like if stories like this remind you that forgotten lives can still be saved by kindness. And tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Sometimes, a story travels farther than the person inside it. That morning, Caleb Turner woke before anyone else in the Harlan house. He knew the place by sound. The old pipes knocked once in the kitchen wall. The refrigerator hummed when first light touched it. Upstairs, Roy Harlan coughed as if even morning had come to bother him. Caleb slipped from the narrow cot in the back room and folded the blanket tight. It was not really his room. It had once held jars of peaches, old curtains, and things nobody needed every day. His clothes fit into one wooden crate beneath the cot. His mother's pale blue handkerchief stayed under his pillow at night and in his jacket pocket during the day. He touched it once, then went outside. The February air bit his ears. Caleb picked up the axe with both hands and split kindling for the stove. He was small for 11, but he knew how to make himself useful. By the time Martha Harlan opened the back door, he had stacked enough wood and carried 2 buckets of water from the pump. "Don't track mud in," she said. "I won't, ma'am." She looked at the wood, then at the buckets. She did not say thank you. The kitchen smelled of coffee and hot biscuits. The Harlan children argued over jam. Caleb stood by the sink until Martha nodded toward the chair nearest the wall. Roy came in last. He looked at Caleb the way a man might look at a tool that had started costing more to fix than it was worth. Martha passed the plates around, 2 biscuits for Roy, 2 for each Harlan child, 1 for herself, half of one on Caleb's chipped plate. Caleb looked at it once, then waited until everyone else began eating. "You fed the chickens?" Roy asked. "Yes, sir." "Brought water?" "Yes, sir." "Wood?" "Yes, sir." Roy tore open a biscuit. "Still costs more to keep you than you bring in." The words were not loud. That made them worse. "I can do more after school," Caleb said. "The fence by the south pasture is loose." Martha stopped counting the biscuits left on the tray. "You're not going to school today," she said. Caleb looked up. Roy leaned back in his chair. "County woman's coming next week. We'll tell her you ran off." For a moment, Caleb did not understand. County woman. Next week. Ran off. "But I didn't," he said. Roy's eyes lifted. "Not yet." Martha wiped her hands on her apron, though they were clean. "There's a sack by the back door. I put your gray shirt in it. And those socks from Christmas." Caleb turned. The flour sack sat beside the door, folded at the top and tied with twine. It had not been thrown there in anger. That hurt more. Someone had packed it carefully while he was outside working. "I can work for the food," he said again, softer. Martha looked tired, not exactly cruel, but tired in a way that left no room for mercy. "Caleb, we've done what we can." He wanted to ask which part had been care. The cold back room? The counted biscuits? But his mother's voice rose inside him before anger could. "Don't let hard people make you hard." So Caleb swallowed the words. He finished the half biscuit because leaving it would have seemed proud, and pride was dangerous when you owned nothing. Then he carried his plate to the sink, washed it, dried it, and set it carefully on the shelf. Martha watched as if she expected a scene. Roy watched as if he wanted one. Caleb gave neither of them that. He went to the back room, lifted his pillow, and took his mother's handkerchief. He tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket. Then he returned to the kitchen and picked up the flour sack. It was lighter than he expected. 1 shirt, 1 pair of socks, nothing heavy enough to prove he had lived there. At the door, Caleb paused for one breath, thinking someone might change their mind if he stood still long enough. No one did. He opened the door himself. Cold air moved around his ankles. Outside, the yard was gray beneath the morning sky. The woodpile he had stacked sat neat beside the shed. The water buckets he had carried were still by the stove behind him. All the proof of his usefulness remained inside. But he did not. Behind him, Martha said, "Take the road east. There are houses that way." It was not advice. It was distance. Caleb nodded because he could not trust his voice. Then Roy reached past him and pulled the door shut. The latch clicked with a small, final sound. Caleb stood on the porch, holding the flour sack against his chest. No one called his name. No footsteps came back to the door. For the first time in his life, Caleb understood that he could disappear from a house and leave almost no emptiness behind. Before continuing, Caleb stood for one more moment on the Harlan back porch. Behind the closed door, breakfast went on. A chair scraped. One of the Harlan children laughed. Roy Harlan said something about the south pasture fence, the same fence Caleb had offered to fix. The house did not grow quiet because he was gone. It simply kept living without him. Caleb stepped down into the yard with the flour sack pressed against his chest. The wood he had split that morning sat stacked by the shed. The water buckets he had carried were still inside by the stove. Everything he had done remained useful, only he had been removed. He crossed the yard and reached the road before he looked back. No one stood in the window. So Caleb started east, the way Martha had told him. County Road 9 was narrow, bordered by winter fields and sagging fence wire. Caleb walked on the shoulder, moving aside whenever a truck passed. Gravel jumped beneath tires. Cold wind found the missing button in his jacket and slipped through it. He tried to think of practical things. The county office was in town. Town was far. He had one shirt in the sack, one pair of socks, his mother's handkerchief, and half a biscuit wrapped in newspaper. If he walked fast, maybe he could reach a church before dark. If he found a porch, maybe someone would let him sleep there. The first house had white siding and smoke coming from the chimney. A yellow dog barked before Caleb reached the steps. A woman opened the door, only a little, just enough for one eye and half her apron. "Yes?" Caleb held the sack low. "Ma'am, is there any work I could do? For a meal, or just to sit near the stove a minute?" The woman looked at his shoes, then his thin jacket. "Whose boy are you?" Caleb's mouth went dry. He had been his mother's boy once. Then he had been a county placement. Then he had been the extra child at the Harlan table. "I was staying with the Harlans," he said. The woman's face changed. "Not cruel. Careful. You need to go to the county office," she said. "They handle things like this." "How far is it?" She looked past him toward the road. "Too far before dark." For a second, Caleb thought she might open the door wider. Instead, she said, "I'm sorry," and closed it gently. Caleb stood there because gentle still left him outside. At the next house, an old man came out before Caleb could knock. "Don't need anything," he called. "I'm not selling, sir. Don't need trouble either. I can work." The man looked at the flour sack. "Work starts with a home to go back to." Then he went inside. By afternoon, Caleb sat on a low stone wall beside a field and unwrapped the biscuit. It had gone hard at the edges. He broke it into 2 pieces, ate the smaller one, and wrapped the larger piece again. Tomorrow might be worse. That thought sounded too grown for an 11-year-old boy, but it came easily. Clouds thickened over the fields. The light turned gray. Caleb passed a church with a sign out front that read, "God sees the forgotten." He stopped and stared at the words. The church doors were locked. No cars waited in the gravel lot. No warm light glowed in the windows. Leaves had gathered against the steps like nobody had opened them in days. Caleb kept walking. The rain began just after the church disappeared behind him. First mist, then steady drops that darkened his sleeves and soaked the flour sack. He pulled his jacket closed, but the wind kept finding him. Near Miller's Creek, he paused under a bare sycamore tree. For one weak moment, he thought about turning back. Not because he believed Roy would want him. Not because Martha would set a plate for him. But because going back to a closed door seemed less frightening than walking toward a night with no door at all. His fingers went to the handkerchief in his pocket. "Don't let hard people make you hard." His mother's words did not feed him. They did not tell him where to sleep. But they kept him from returning to people who had already decided he was not worth keeping. Caleb stepped out from under the tree. The road bent east, away from the last houses. Fence posts leaned in the wet grass. Blackberry vines twisted through broken wire. A rusted gate hung open on one hinge, tapping softly whenever the wind moved. Beyond it, an old lane disappeared into weeds. At the far end of that lane, through rain and dusk, Caleb saw the black outline of the Burnett farm. The burned barn stood behind the abandoned house, like something the world had forgotten on purpose. Caleb had heard the schoolboys talk about it. No one goes there after dark. He looked back at the empty road. Then he looked at the open gate. With rain sliding cold beneath his collar, Caleb left County Road 9 and followed the forgotten lane in. The lane to the Burnett farm was not really a lane anymore. Grass had swallowed the tire tracks. Rainwater filled the ruts. Blackberry vines reached from both sides as if the field itself had been trying, year after year, to close the place off from the road. Caleb held the flour sack under his jacket and walked carefully, placing each foot where the ground looked firm. It was getting dark faster under the trees. The gate behind him tapped in the wind until the sound faded into the rain. Ahead, the abandoned farmhouse waited with its windows black and empty. One shutter hung crooked from a nail, knocking softly against the siding. The porch leaned toward the ground. A rusted milk can lay on its side near the steps. Caleb stopped at the edge of the yard. He had seen empty houses before, but this one felt different. Some houses looked empty because people had moved on. This one looked as if everyone had left in the middle of a breath. A child's swing still hung from an oak tree, one rope longer than the other. A line of jars sat along the porch rail, filled with rain and dead leaves. Near the doorway, a pair of work gloves had hardened into the shape of hands. Caleb almost turned away. Then a gust of wind pushed rain through his collar, and his body made the decision his fear could not. He climbed the porch steps. The first board gave under his shoe with a wet groan. Caleb froze. He waited, listening for the crack that would send him through, but the board held. He moved to the next step, then the next, and reached the door. It was locked. He tried the handle twice, gently at first, then with both hands. Nothing moved except the loose shutter scraping behind him. Caleb peered through a broken pane beside the door. Inside, he could see the shape of a room, a table on its side, wallpaper curling from the wall, a dark stain on the ceiling where water had been coming through for years. He could not sleep in there even if he found a way in. The roof looked ready to give up. He backed down from the porch. The rain had grown steadier. His hair stuck to his forehead. One side of the flour sack had darkened where water soaked through, and he worried about the socks inside. Dry socks were not much, but they were something. He looked across the yard. Behind the house, beyond a field of weeds, stood the barn. It was bigger than he expected. In the last of the gray light, the burned beams rose like black bones. Half the roof had fallen inward. The far wall leaned, but the front still stood, with one wide doorway yawning open and another smaller stall door set back in shadow. The smell reached him before he reached it: old smoke, wet wood, and hay rotted into the earth. The schoolboys in Miller's Creek had always talked about the Burnett barn when they wanted to scare someone. They said lightning struck it in August, though Caleb had heard another boy swear it had been a lantern. They said Mr. Burnett left town after his wife died. They said animals burned inside, and on cold nights you could still hear them crying. Caleb did not believe every story boys told. Boys told stories to feel bigger than the dark. Still, when he crossed the yard, he kept his eyes on the ground instead of the barn's broken windows. His shoe sank into mud near the old trough, and he nearly fell. He caught himself against a fence post. The wood broke under his hand and dropped into the weeds. He stood breathing hard. No one shouted. No dog barked. No light came on anywhere. That, somehow, made it worse. At the barn entrance, Caleb paused again. Wind moved through the open side and stirred something loose inside. A piece of hanging tin ticked against a beam. Somewhere, water dripped into a metal pail with a slow, hollow sound. He stepped in. The air changed at once. Outside, the rain had been sharp and cold. Inside, it was damp, close, and full of ash. Caleb's eyes adjusted slowly. He could make out the wide center aisle, the remains of old stalls along one side, and heaps of blackened boards where the roof had fallen. He stayed near the wall where the overhead beams looked strongest. The ground was uneven beneath his shoes. Mud mixed with straw, ash, and splinters. In one place, hoofprints had dried in the dirt years ago and remained there like marks in clay. Caleb crouched and touched one with 2 fingers. Something had lived here once, not just passed through. A farm was not like a house, he thought. A house could close its door and pretend. A barn remembered everything that had depended on it. He moved deeper inside. On the left wall, iron hooks still held pieces of old harness. A cracked feed scoop hung from a nail. In a corner, a wooden trough had survived the fire, though one end was burned black. Caleb lifted it and found only dust beneath. His stomach cramped, and he reached into the sack for the biscuit. He held it in his palm, looked at it, then put it back. Not yet. He needed to think first. If he slept here, he had to find a place the rain could not reach. He had to stay away from the fallen roof. He had to keep his sack dry. He had to listen for animals, men, or anything else that might come after dark. He almost laughed at that last thought. As if he had a choice. Caleb found a corner near the back where the roof still covered a patch of ground. Old straw had gathered there, dusty but not soaked. He shook it with his shoe, checking for rats or snakes the way his mother had once taught him near a woodpile. Nothing moved. He set the flour sack down and sat beside it. For the first time since morning, his legs stopped carrying him. The relief was so sudden it hurt. His knees trembled, his shoulders sagged. He leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. Then he heard it. A thin sound. Caleb opened his eyes. The barn was full of small noises. Rain on tin, wind through cracks, water dripping, wood creaking as the cold settled into it. He held still and waited. There it was again. Not a creak. Not rain. A small, strained cry. Caleb pushed himself up from the straw. "Hello?" he whispered, then felt foolish. If someone answered, that might be worse than silence. No one answered. The sound came again, weaker this time, from the far row of stalls. Caleb picked up a broken length of wood, not because he planned to use it, but because holding something made him feel less small. He moved one step at a time along the aisle. His shoe brushed a piece of metal, and it scraped across the floor. He stopped, heart pounding. The cry came once more. Closer. At the end of the row stood a stall door, half hidden behind a fallen board and a curtain of old rope. The top hinge had twisted. The bottom was wedged against the dirt. Someone had tied it shut long ago with a loop of rope gone dark from smoke and weather. Caleb stared at it. Behind that door, something shifted. Not much, just enough to stir the straw. He thought of the schoolboys talking about animals crying on cold nights. He thought of the locked church. He thought of the woman who had closed her door gently. He thought of Roy Harlan, saying he cost more than he brought in. Then he heard the sound again. It was not a ghost. It was hungry. Caleb dropped the broken stick. His fingers found the knot in the rope. It was swollen from rain and stiff with age. He pulled once, and the knot held. He pulled again, harder. A splinter cut into his thumb. He hissed through his teeth, but did not stop. The rope loosened a little. Inside the stall, the living thing breathed in short, uneven bursts. Caleb braced one foot against the door and worked the knot with both hands until the old fibers finally gave. The rope slipped free. The door moved half an inch, then caught against the dirt. Caleb leaned his shoulder into it. From inside came one more weak, trembling bleat. He froze with his cheek against the burned wood. A goat. There was a goat inside. And somehow, in the dead Burnett barn, she was still alive. Caleb pushed the stall door again. It scraped against the dirt with a low, stubborn sound, moving only a few inches at first. Something inside stirred weakly. The smell that came out was sour and old damp straw, animal fear, and the dry, bitter dust of a place no one had cleaned in years. Caleb swallowed. "It's all right," he whispered, though he had no idea if that was true. He leaned his shoulder into the door a second time. The bottom edge dragged through packed mud. A broken hinge groaned. Then the gap widened enough for him to slip one eye through. At first, he saw only darkness. Then the shape moved. A goat lay in the back corner of the stall, folded awkwardly against the wall. She was so thin Caleb could count the bones beneath her dirty coat. One horn was chipped. Her ears drooped. A length of old rope had twisted around one back leg and caught beneath a fallen board, holding her there whenever she tried to rise. Beside her sat an empty feed bucket. The wooden water pail had tipped over and dried with a ring of mud at the bottom. Caleb stood very still. He had seen hungry animals before. He had seen dogs tied behind houses and chickens with missing feathers. But this was different. This goat had not wandered here. She had not chosen this dark corner. She had been left in a place people had already decided was dead. The goat lifted her head a little. Her eyes caught the faint light from the broken roof. Caleb forgot the rain, the road, the biscuit in his sack, and the locked church behind him. For one strange moment, he felt as if he were looking at something that understood him before he spoke. "You're stuck," he said softly. The goat blinked. Caleb squeezed through the stall doorway. The space was narrow, and a piece of burned wood snagged his jacket. He pulled free carefully, afraid sudden movement would scare her. "I'm not going to hurt you." The words sounded too grown up coming from him. They sounded like something his mother might have said to a frightened animal near the fence behind their old house. She had always lowered her voice around scared things. Caleb remembered that now. He crouched a few feet away. The goat tried to shift, then gave a weak cry and stopped. "All right," Caleb said. "I see it." The rope was not tied neatly. It had twisted around her leg many times, probably tightening whenever she pulled. Caleb could not tell how long she had been trapped. The thought made his throat tighten. He crawled closer on his knees. The goat jerked once, but she did not have the strength to fight. Caleb stopped at once and held out his open hand. "Ease." His palm was dirty from the barn floor. A thin line of blood marked his thumb where the rope had cut him. He kept his hand still until the goat lowered her nose toward it. She sniffed him. Her breath was warm but shallow. "That's right," Caleb murmured. "I'm just Caleb." He did not know why he gave his name to a goat. Maybe because no one had used it kindly that day. Maybe because names mattered more when there was nobody else around to remember them. He reached for the rope. The first loop came loose with effort. The fibers were rough and stiff, caked with dirt near her leg. Caleb worked slowly, pinching each strand apart. The goat trembled whenever his fingers brushed the sore place, and each time she did, Caleb stopped until she settled. Outside, the rain softened for a minute, then returned harder on the damaged roof. Caleb's knees grew wet from the floor. His back ached from bending. Twice, the knot slipped from his fingers. Once, the goat kicked weakly and caught his wrist. Pain flashed up his arm, but he did not get angry. "You don't know," he whispered. "That's all. You don't know I'm helping." It took a long time to free the last loop. When it finally slipped from her leg, the goat did not move. She only lay there breathing, as if freedom itself was too heavy to understand. Caleb looked at the swollen place above her hoof. The hair had rubbed away. The skin beneath was raw, but not bleeding badly. He sat back on his heels. "There," he said. "You can get up now." The goat did not get up. Caleb waited. Nothing. His stomach tightened with fear. Maybe he had come too late. Maybe the sound had only been the last bit of life leaving her. "No," he said, sharper than he meant to. He looked around the stall for anything useful. Empty bucket, broken board, old straw, a cracked scoop, nothing green, nothing clean. Water first, he thought. His mother had once told him that when a sick animal would not rise, you did not start by asking it to be strong. You started with water. Caleb crawled back through the stall door and searched the barn. The rain had been falling long enough to collect in low places. Near the entrance, an old metal trough leaned beneath a broken section of roof. Water dripped into it from the edge of a hanging sheet of tin. He ran to it and looked inside. Leaves floated on the surface. Ash had settled at the bottom, but it was water. Caleb found a rusted coffee can beside the wall. He rinsed it twice in the trough, rubbing the inside with his sleeve, then filled it halfway. He carried it back with both hands, walking slowly so he would not spill. The goat turned her head when she smelled it. Caleb knelt and held the can near her mouth. At first, she did nothing. Then her lips touched the rim. She drank. Not much. Only a few slow swallows. But Caleb felt something loosen inside his chest as if he had been the one waiting for water. "That's it," he whispered. "Not too fast." He gave her a little more, then pulled the can away before she could make herself sick. He had no right to know that, except he remembered his mother doing the same with a sick calf years earlier. Food was harder. The barn held plenty of old straw, but most of it smelled of mold. Caleb searched along the wall and beneath a fallen panel until he found a small patch of hay that had stayed dry under a sheet of tin. It was dusty, but not black. He shook it out, picked away the worst pieces, and carried it to the goat. She sniffed it. For a moment, Caleb thought she would refuse. Then she took a strand between her lips and chewed slowly. It was such a small thing that anyone else might have missed it. Caleb almost smiled. Outside the stall, he searched again. Near the back of the barn, a gap in the wall opened to the weeds outside. He crawled through it and found winter grass growing along the foundation where the fire had not touched. He pulled handfuls with his cold fingers, roots and mud coming up with them, then shook the dirt away as best he could. The rain ran down his neck, his hands went numb, but when he brought the grass back, the goat lifted her head a little higher. "There you go," Caleb said. "You were just waiting on somebody slow enough to notice." The words came out before he thought about them. Then he stopped, waiting on somebody slow enough to notice. He thought of the woman at the White House looking at his jacket and deciding not to open the door. He thought of the old man saying work started with a home. He thought of every grown-up who had looked at him long enough to see trouble, but not long enough to see a boy. Caleb put the grass down. The goat ate 3 mouthfuls, then rested. Caleb sat beside her with his back against the stall wall. For a while, neither of them moved much. Rain tapped. Wood creaked. The old barn breathed around them. After a few minutes, Caleb noticed something half-hidden in the dirty hair beneath the goat's neck. A tag. It hung from a cracked leather collar, pressed flat against her coat. Caleb leaned closer and wiped it with his thumb. The metal was tarnished, and one corner had bent, but letters remained scratched into the surface. "Mabel." He sounded it out under his breath. "Mabel." The goat's ear twitched. Caleb looked at her, surprised. "That's your name?" She did not answer, of course. She only chewed slowly, as if a name was something she had not heard in a long time. Caleb touched the tag again. "You got a name," he said. His voice grew quieter. "That's good." For some reason, that hurt. All day, people had spoken around Caleb as if he were a problem to be moved from one place to another. County matter. Trouble. Extra cost. Not once had anyone said his name like it belonged to someone who mattered. But this goat, trapped in a burned barn, still carried proof that somebody once knew her. "Mabel." He said it again, this time more firmly. The goat shifted. Her front legs moved first. She tried to push herself up and failed. Caleb moved quickly to her side, then stopped, unsure where to put his hands. She tried again, trembling so hard her bones seemed to knock beneath her skin. "Easy," Caleb said. "You don't have to do it all." He slid one arm beneath her neck and braced his other hand near her shoulder. He was not strong enough to lift her, but he could steady her. Mabel pushed again. This time she rose halfway. Her back legs shook. Her injured hoof barely touched the ground. Caleb held his breath. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, she stood. Then her legs folded, and she sank back into the straw. But she had stood. Caleb laughed once, soft and disbelieving. "You did it," he whispered. Mabel lowered her head, as if exhausted by the victory. Caleb sat beside her again. He unwrapped the last piece of biscuit from his sack and looked at it. He knew goats did not need biscuits. He knew he did. His stomach cramped hard enough that he bent forward. But instead of eating, he wrapped it again. Not yet. There were more important things than hunger now. That was a dangerous thought, maybe even a foolish one. Still, it gave him something hunger had not given him all day. A reason to decide. The corner near Mabel's stall was not dry, but it was better than the open road. The barn was not safe, but some parts still stood. Mabel could not be left alone. If he walked away, she might tangle herself again, or fail to reach the water, or lie down and not rise. Caleb looked toward the wide barn door. Beyond it, dusk had deepened into night. The road was out there somewhere, along with locked doors, careful faces, and a county office too far to reach. Then he looked at Mabel. She was watching him. No one had asked Caleb to stay. No one would thank him if he did. No one might even know. But for the first time since morning, leaving felt wrong. Caleb stood and dragged the driest straw he could find into a small pile outside the stall. He placed the flour sack beneath a beam where rain did not fall. Then he set the coffee can of water close enough for Mabel to smell, but not close enough for her to knock over. "I'll stay tonight," he told her. His voice sounded small in the ruined barn. Mabel blinked slowly. Caleb pulled his jacket tighter around himself and sat with his back against the stall door, close enough to hear her breathing. Outside, the rain kept falling on the dead Burnett farm. Inside, one boy and one goat listened to each other survive. Caleb did not sleep right away. He sat with his back against the stall door, knees pulled close, listening to the ruined barn settle around him. Rain slid through holes in the roof and tapped the floor in different places, each drip with its own small rhythm. Somewhere above him, a strip of tin lifted in the wind and fell back with a dull clap. Mabel breathed behind him. That sound became the only thing Caleb trusted. Whenever her breathing changed, he turned his head. If it grew too quiet, he whispered her name. If she shifted in the straw, he listened until he was sure she had not tangled her leg again. "Mabel," he said once. The goat gave a tired little huff. "All right," he whispered. "I'm still here." He did not know if he was saying it for her or for himself. The cold came up from the ground before midnight. Caleb had chosen the driest corner he could find, but dry did not mean warm. The straw beneath him held dust, not heat. His jacket was thin, and the missing button let the wind slip through whenever the barn breathed. He took the flour sack and tucked it beneath his head, but after a few minutes, he sat up again. Mabel had begun to tremble. Caleb looked at the sack. Inside were his gray shirt, the spare socks, and the last piece of biscuit wrapped in paper. Not much of a life. Still, it was all he owned. He pulled out the shirt. It was damp along one sleeve, but mostly dry. He crawled into the stall and laid it gently across Mabel's side, careful not to touch the sore place on her leg. The shirt looked too small even on a thin goat, but it covered part of her ribs. "There," he said. "You can borrow it." Mabel's ear moved. Caleb returned to his place outside the stall door. Without the shirt, the sack was flatter beneath his head. He lowered himself onto the straw and tried to close his eyes. But sleep came in pieces. He dreamed of the Harlan kitchen, except the table was inside the barn, and every biscuit on the tray turned to ash when he reached for it. He woke with his hand closed around nothing. For a while, he listened to the rain. Then he heard Mabel move. Caleb pushed himself up at once. His body protested, stiff from cold in the hard floor. He leaned through the stall opening and saw Mabel trying to shift her weight. Her injured leg trembled. "Easy," he murmured. He reached for the coffee can and held it near her mouth. She drank 2 slow swallows, then turned away. Caleb set the can back where she would not tip it over. "Good girl." The words came naturally. He remembered his mother saying them to a stubborn milk cow years ago. "Good girl. Easy now. Try again." Memory hurt less when it had something useful to do. Near dawn, the rain weakened. The darkness changed from black to gray. Caleb had not truly slept, but he had drifted enough that his thoughts felt heavy and slow. His stomach cramped, and this time he unwrapped the last piece of biscuit. He held it in both hands. It was not large. 2 bites, maybe 3 if he was careful. He almost ate all of it at once. Instead, he broke it in half. One half went into his mouth. The other he wrapped again, though he knew it was foolish to save crumbs from hunger. He chewed slowly and tried not to think about breakfast smells in houses with locked doors. Mabel watched him. "You can't eat this," he told her softly. "I checked." She blinked, unimpressed. For the first time since leaving the Harlan house, Caleb almost smiled. By the time the first thin light came through the broken roof, he could see more of the barn. The fire damage was worse than he had guessed. Some beams were black all the way through. One wall had bowed outward, but the corner near Mabel's stall had survived, and the roof above it still held. That meant something. Caleb stood and stretched his sore back. His fingers were stiff, but he began gathering the worst pieces of broken wood from around the stall. He moved slowly, stacking them against the wall. Not fixing, not really, just making a small space less dangerous than it had been. Mabel lifted her head. "You stay," he said. "I'll find more grass." He crawled out through the gap near the back wall and pulled wet grass along the foundation. The ground soaked his knees. Mud packed beneath his fingernails. By the time he carried the grass back, his hands were numb. Mabel ate a little more than she had the night before. That was enough to make Caleb stand straighter. He searched the barn again and found an old brush beneath a collapsed shelf. Most of its bristles were bent, but some remained. He brought it to Mabel and brushed one small patch of dried mud from her shoulder. She flinched at first. Caleb stopped. When she did not pull away again, he continued. "You used to belong to somebody," he said. The tag on her collar caught the morning light. "Mabel." Caleb touched it once, then went back to brushing. Outside, beyond the barn entrance, the world brightened into a wet, pale morning. Caleb was trying to decide whether he should go back to the road and look for the county office when he saw something near the wide doorway. He froze. A tin can sat on a flat stone just inside the barn. Beside it lay a piece of cornbread wrapped in a clean cloth and a glass bottle filled with water. Caleb stared at them. They had not been there before. He knew that with the sharp certainty of a child who owned almost nothing and noticed everything. Last night, that stone had been empty. He had crossed near it twice while searching for water. Now food waited there, not much, but real food. Caleb turned quickly toward the yard. No one stood in the open. The lane was empty. The farmhouse windows remained black. Rain dripped from the porch roof. The weeds moved in the wind. He stepped closer to the food, then stopped. Maybe it was a trap. Maybe someone had seen him enter the barn and wanted to know if he would steal. Maybe if he touched it, a man would appear and accuse him. Caleb had learned that gifts from grown-ups often came with questions hidden underneath. He crouched and looked at the cloth. It was clean, faded yellow, folded around the cornbread with care. A person who wanted to trap a boy would not have wrapped bread like that. Still, Caleb did not take it right away. "Hello?" he called. His voice disappeared into the wet yard. No answer. He waited. Only the barn replied, dripping and creaking softly around him. At last, Caleb picked up the bottle of water. He carried it first to Mabel and poured a little into the coffee can. Then he opened the tin. Beans. Cold, but soft enough to eat. His hands shook when he lifted the first spoonful. There was no spoon. Caleb almost laughed at himself. He tilted the can carefully and ate from the edge, taking small mouthfuls, forcing himself not to swallow too fast. The beans tasted like salt and smoke and something better than kindness because they were there when no one had promised anything. He ate half. Then he stopped. The rest he covered with the cloth and set high on a beam where rats would have trouble reaching it. He did not know when food would come again. At the edge of the barn doorway, he noticed tracks in the mud. Not his. The prints were small, narrow, and careful. A woman's shoes, maybe boots. They came from the direction of the neighboring field and returned the same way. Caleb followed them with his eyes until they disappeared into wet grass beyond the fence line. Someone had come close enough to see him, close enough to leave food, not close enough to speak. Across the field, hidden behind a row of bare trees, Ruth Bell stood at her kitchen window with both hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had gone cold. She had seen the boy the evening before. At first, she told herself it was none of her business. Children wandered sometimes. County people handled such things. She was too old, too tired, and too full of old grief to invite trouble to her door. But then she had watched him crawl into the burned barn. She had nearly gone after him. She had not. That failure kept her awake. Long after midnight, Ruth had stood at the window and seen the faint movement of his small shape near the stall. She saw him take off his shirt and lay it over the goat. She saw him carry water in a rusted can. She saw him sit with his back against the stall door, as if guarding something no one else in the world remembered. And Ruth Bell, who had spent years making sure she needed nobody, found herself unable to look away. Now, from her kitchen, she watched the boy find the food. He did not grab it like a thief. He called out first. He fed the goat water before feeding himself. Ruth closed her eyes. Something in that simple order of care hurt her more than she expected. Back in the barn, Caleb stood by the doorway, looking toward the field. He did not know the woman's name. He did not know why she had helped. He did not even know if she wanted him gone by noon. But he knew one thing. He could not take food and leave nothing behind. So after Mabel finished eating the grass, Caleb gathered the broken boards he had moved earlier. He dragged the driest pieces outside and stacked them near the barn wall. Then he searched until he found an old axe head without a handle and used a sharp piece of metal to split smaller scraps into kindling. It was clumsy work. His hands slipped. His thumb bled again. The pile was not large, but by the time the morning had fully come, a neat bundle of dry kindling sat near the stone where the food had been left. Caleb looked toward the hidden field one more time. "If you come back," he said quietly, "I'll pay what I can." Mabel chewed behind him. The burned barn no longer felt empty. Not safe. Not home. Not yet. But no longer empty. Caleb began with the floor. Not the whole barn. That would have been foolish. The burned beams, the sagging wall, the collapsed roof, those were too much for one boy with no tools and no right to be there. But the floor around Mabel's stall was something he could understand. A nail here, a splinter there, a strip of charred wood where her hoof might catch. Small dangers, Caleb knew small dangers. They were the kind grown-ups ignored until someone smaller paid for them. So he gathered what he could move. He dragged blackened boards away from the stall, kicked bent nails into a coffee can, and swept ash with a broken feed sack tied around a stick. Every few minutes he stopped to check Mabel. She watched him from the straw, chewing slowly. "You're supervising," Caleb told her. By noon, his hands were black with soot, and his sleeves were streaked with mud, but the space around the stall looked less like a place where things came to die. It looked like a place someone had started to care about. Near the back wall, Caleb found old tin sheets under a fallen beam. One piece was wide enough to cover the worst hole above Mabel's corner. It took him nearly an hour to pull it free. The tin slipped once and sliced the side of his palm. He wrapped the cut with a strip torn from the inside seam of his flour sack. Then he kept working. The tin was too heavy to lift properly, so Caleb pushed it along the wall, climbed onto an overturned crate, and wedged one edge beneath a surviving roof board. It did not sit straight. It rattled when the wind touched it. But when the next light rain came, the water ran down the tin and fell outside the stall instead of inside it. For the first time all day, Caleb felt taller. That afternoon, he searched for better water. The trough near the entrance still held rain, but it was dirty. Behind the farmhouse, half hidden by weeds, he found a stone well with a cracked wooden cover. The rope on the bucket had rotted through. Caleb dropped a pebble and waited. When it finally struck water, he smiled before he meant to. There was still water down there. He found a stiff clothesline in the shed and tied it to a small metal pail with one handle missing. The first time he lowered it, the pail tipped sideways and came up empty. The second time, it spilled. The third time, he waited for the hollow splash, then pulled with both hands until the line burned across his palms. The pail came up half full. Clear enough. He carried it to Mabel like a man carrying treasure. When he returned to the barn door, another bundle waited on the stone. This time it was wrapped in the same yellow cloth. Bread, a boiled egg, a small jar of beans, and an apple with one bruised side. Caleb looked toward the field. "I know you're there," he called. "Only wind moved." He waited, then added, "Thank you." He ate the egg first because protein was something his mother had once said a working body needed. He saved half the bread. The apple he put aside for later, then changed his mind and took one bite. Juice, tart and bright, filled his mouth so suddenly that his eyes stung. He was still standing there when he noticed the woman near the fence. She wore a brown coat and boots dark with mud. Her gray hair was pinned low, and she held herself straight, as if every part of her had learned not to ask for support. "You the one leaving food?" Caleb asked. The woman did not answer right away. "You the one leaving kindling?" she said. "Yes, ma'am. It was wet. I put the driest pieces on top. I noticed." She walked no closer than the edge of the yard. Her eyes moved past Caleb into the barn, toward Mabel's stall. Something changed in her face. So quickly Caleb might have missed it if he had not become good at reading small changes. "You shouldn't be in that barn," she said. "I know. It could come down. I know that too. Then why are you still there?" Caleb glanced back. Mabel had risen onto her front knees, nosing at the hay he had cleaned from under the tin. "She can't leave yet." The woman's mouth tightened. "You have a name?" "Caleb Turner." "Where are your people, Caleb Turner?" "My mother died," he said. "The Harlans took me in after. They don't want me there now." "County no?" "They will next week. Mr. Harlan said he'd tell them I ran off." "And did you?" Caleb looked at the flour sack beside the doorway. "I walked out after they packed my things." The woman's eyes lowered. For a moment, Caleb thought she would tell him to leave. Instead, she looked toward a loose section of fence near the lane. "My gate latch is broken," she said. "If a boy wanted to pay for food, he might start there." Caleb straightened. "I can fix a latch. Don't say it until you see it. My name is Ruth Bell. My house is beyond that field. You come by the back gate, not the front." "Yes, ma'am. And don't go poking through my things." "No, ma'am." Ruth turned to leave, then stopped. "That goat got water?" "Yes, ma'am. From the well." Ruth looked back sharply. "The Burnett well still draws?" "Yes, ma'am." She stood still for one breath too long. Then she said, "Don't drink it without boiling. And don't give her moldy hay." "I won't." Ruth nodded once, as if she did not want to approve of him but could not find the error fast enough. The next morning, Caleb went to her back gate. Ruth's place was small and plain, with 2 bare pecan trees in the yard and a woodshed stacked neater than any place he had seen in months. Nothing about it welcomed visitors. Even the curtains seemed cautious. The gate latch was worse than broken. One screw had fallen out, the post had shifted, and the latch tongue no longer reached its catch. Caleb studied it before touching anything. Ruth stood on the porch with her arms folded. "Well? I need a nail, a small piece of wood, and something to hammer with." "In the shed." Caleb waited. Ruth frowned. "What? You said not to poke through your things." A strange look crossed her face. Not a smile, but close enough to trouble her. "I'll get it." She brought him a coffee can of nails, a split piece of board, and a hammer with tape around the handle. Caleb wedged the board behind the latch, tapped the nail in carefully, then tested the gate 3 times. It clicked shut. Ruth tried it herself. Caleb did not know whether that meant good or bad. "I can sweep the porch too," he said. "I didn't ask you to." "No, Mom." But he looked at the leaves gathered along the steps. Ruth saw him looking. "Fine. If you're set on working yourself hollow." Caleb swept the porch, then carried 2 split logs closer to the kitchen door because the stack was too far for a woman her age in bad weather. When he left, she handed him a covered bowl. "Stew," she said. "For you, not the goat." Caleb accepted it with both hands. "Yes, ma'am." "And Caleb." He stopped. "You come back tomorrow if the barn hasn't crushed you." It was not an invitation dressed kindly, but it was an invitation. Days began to take shape after that. Not easy days, not safe ones, but shaped. At dawn, Caleb checked Mabel's leg, cleaned her water, and brought grass from the foundation where it grew thickest. Then he crossed the field to Ruth's back gate and did whatever work she set out without making her ask twice. He stacked wood, swept mud from the back steps, cleared leaves from the drainage ditch, and patched a loose board near her chicken run. In return, Ruth left food wrapped in cloth or handed him bowls without looking directly at his face for too long. Some mornings, she said almost nothing. Other mornings, she corrected him. "Don't stack wood bark side down." "Yes, ma'am." "You pull weeds from the root, or they come back like bad relatives." "Yes, ma'am." He learned her rules. She learned his habits. Caleb never took the first bite until he had checked whether Ruth expected something done. He never walked into her house unless told. If she gave him more food than he thought he had earned, he found another task before sundown. One evening, Ruth stood near the barn entrance while Caleb brushed Mabel's coat. "You ever work with goats before?" she asked. "My mama helped at a dairy place when I was little. Not big, just 6 goats and a cow that hated everybody." "Your mama teach you?" "Some." She said animals remember hands. Ruth's fingers tightened around the shawl at her shoulders. "That's so?" "Yes, ma'am. Bad hands and good ones." Mabel leaned slightly into Caleb's brushing, as if proving the point. Ruth looked away first. On the 6th day, Caleb found the notebook. It had slipped behind a loose board in the feed room, half protected from water by a fallen shelf. The cover was brown and curled at the edges. Burn marks darkened one corner. Inside were dates, feed mixtures, weather notes, kidding records, and names. Mabel appeared on the 3rd page. Mabel small, white face, stubborn feeder, likes warm mash. Caleb touched the line with one finger. "You were stubborn from the start," he told her. He carried the notebook to Ruth. She was sitting on her back step shelling peas into a bowl. When she saw the cover, the peas stopped falling. "Where'd you get that?" "Feed room. Behind a board." Ruth wiped her hands on her apron before taking it. She opened to the 1st page and stared at the handwriting. "Mrs. Burnett kept records for everything," she said. "You knew her?" Everybody knew everybody then. What happened to them? The question hung between them. Ruth looked across the field toward the burned barn. "Mrs. Burnett got sick. Mr. Burnett tried to keep the farm going after. Then the fire came. After that, he left. Some folks leave because they don't care. Some leave because caring is the thing they can't survive." Caleb thought about that. Did he know Mabel was still here? Ruth's face tightened. "I don't know." It was the first time Caleb heard pain in her voice. He did not ask more. That night, he read the notebook by the gray light near the barn door, sounding out words he did not know. Warm mash, clean water, dry bedding, check hooves, do not overfeed after neglect. The last note made him sit straighter. After neglect, so there was a way back from it. He began following the notebook as best he could. He mixed warm water with a little grain Ruth brought, not too much. He cleaned Mabel's hoof with a rag. He replaced the old straw with better bedding Ruth grudgingly gave him from her shed. Each day, Mabel stood longer. Then, one cold morning, while Caleb was brushing mud from her side, he noticed her udder looked fuller than before. Ruth came by later with a bucket and stopped in the doorway. Has she been eating regular? Yes, ma'am. Drinking? Yes, ma'am. She may give milk if she's strong enough. Caleb looked at Mabel as if she had turned into a miracle and a responsibility at the same time. How do I know? You don't. You learn. Ruth showed him with steady hands, speaking plainly. Caleb listened to every word. Mabel shifted but did not kick. At first, nothing happened. Then one thin stream struck the bottom of the tin cup. Caleb started. Another followed. Not much. Barely enough to cover the bottom. But the sound of it was clear and bright in the burned barn. Ruth did not speak. Caleb held the cup with both hands, afraid even his breath might spill it. Mabel lowered her head into the hay as if she had done nothing remarkable. But Caleb knew better. All week he had cleaned, carried, patched, brushed, waited, and tried again. All week, the barn had smelled less like old fire and more like straw. All week, Ruth had stood at the edge of helping and pretended she was only watching. Now there was milk. Not enough to sell, not enough to fill a jar, not enough to solve anything grown-ups called a problem. Enough to prove life had answered. Caleb looked at Ruth. You should have it, he said. Ruth blinked. Me? You brought food first. That milk came because you stayed. But we wouldn't have made it without you. Ruth's mouth pressed tight. For a moment, Caleb thought she was angry. Then he saw her eyes. He carried the cup carefully across the muddy yard, through Ruth's back gate, and up the steps to her kitchen door. He did not enter until she nodded. Inside, the kitchen smelled of wood smoke and onions. A chair sat by the table, pulled out slightly as if someone had once left and might come back. Caleb placed the tin cup on the table. The milk sat between them, thin and pale and real. Finally, Ruth whispered, Well, I'll be. Caleb looked down at his soot-stained hands. For the first time in many days, he did not feel like proof of someone's burden. He felt like proof that something left behind could still give. The trouble arrived on a dry morning. That was what Caleb remembered later. Not rain, not thunder, not any warning the sky could be blamed for. The morning was clear, with sunlight lying across the wet boards of the Burnett barn and steam rising from the field. Mabel had eaten well. She stood with her sore leg resting lightly, her head lowered into fresh hay. Caleb was filling her water when he heard tires on the old lane. He stepped outside with the bucket still in his hand. A dark pickup came through the broken gate, moving too fast for a place full of ruts. Mud kicked from the tires. The truck stopped near the farmhouse, and a man in a tan jacket climbed out carrying a clipboard. He looked first at the house, then at the barn, then at Caleb. You, the boy staying here? Caleb set the bucket down. I'm not staying in the house. That's not what I asked. The man walked closer, polished boots sinking in mud. Name's Ellis Pritchard. I'm handling the Burnett property for the bank and the buyer interested in clearing it. Caleb understood the important words. Bank, buyer, clearing. His stomach tightened. Ellis glanced into the barn. This structure should have been marked unsafe years ago. It's not all bad, Caleb said. Son, half that roof is in the dirt. I stay on the strong side. You shouldn't be staying anywhere on this land. Mabel shifted behind him. Ellis looked past Caleb. What's that? A goat. I can see it's a goat. Her name is Mabel. Ellis stepped around him and looked into the stall. That animal belonged to you? No, sir. Belonged to Mrs. Bell? Caleb hesitated. No, sir. Then it's abandoned livestock on bank-held property. She was trapped, Caleb said. I just got her standing again. Ellis wrote something down. Then you did a kind thing. But kindness doesn't create ownership. She'll die if you take her away now. The barn is coming down next week, maybe sooner. Buyer wants the land cleaned before survey. Any animals here have to be removed. Caleb stepped in front of the stall without planning to. Ellis's eyes narrowed. Don't make this harder. I'm not. You're a child trespassing in a condemned structure with an animal that isn't yours. Hard is already here. Across the field, Ruth Bell had heard the truck. She came through the fence gap wearing her brown coat, walking faster than Caleb had ever seen her walk. Her face was calm, but her hands were tight at her sides. Ellis, she said. Ruth, you could have called before coming onto this side. This isn't your side. That barn sits along my fence line, and not across it. Ellis tapped the clipboard. You know this has been coming. The bank wants liability cleared. There's a child standing in front of you, Ruth said. Yes, that is one of the liabilities. The word struck Caleb hard. Liability sounded like extra cost in a cleaner shirt. Ruth looked at Mabel. She's not fit to move. Then call someone qualified. I will. Ellis gave a short laugh. Ruth, don't start adopting every broken thing on that farm. The color left her face. Caleb saw it. Ellis saw it too, but pretended not to. Ruth pulled a small phone from her coat pocket. Her thumb hesitated over the buttons, as if making the call cost more than pride. Then she dialed. Dr. Keller, she said. It's Ruth Bell. I need you at the old Burnett barn. While they waited, Caleb stayed near Mabel. He cleaned her water, though it was already clean. He checked her bedding, though it did not need checking. Doing small things kept his hands from shaking. Dr. Amos Keller arrived in a faded green truck. He was a narrow man with white hair, a weathered face, and eyes that missed very little. He carried a black medical bag and looked at the barn for a long moment before looking at Ruth. Didn't expect to be called back here, he said. Neither did I, Ruth answered. Dr. Keller entered carefully. He examined Mabel's leg, her eyes, her gums, and the small amount of milk she had given that morning. Caleb stood nearby, answering every question. How often water? Small amounts at first. More now. High? Only dry. I picked out the moldy parts before Mrs. Bell brought better. Grain? A little. Mixed warm. The notebook said not to overfeed after neglect. Dr. Keller paused. What notebook? Caleb fetched it from the shelf where he kept it wrapped in cloth. The veterinarian opened the burned cover. His expression changed when he saw the handwriting. Well, he murmured, I haven't seen Eleanor Burnett's notes in a long time. Ellis folded his arms. Can the goat be moved or not? Dr. Keller looked at him over the notebook. Not without risk. She's recovering from neglect, rope injury, exposure, and likely long malnutrition. Whoever has been tending her kept her alive by being careful. Caleb lowered his eyes. Ruth did not. The boy? Ellis asked. The boy, Dr. Keller said. For the first time, the word did not sound small, but Ellis was not finished. Careful or not, he can't stay here. If he's a runaway, county needs to be called. At that exact moment, another vehicle came through the gate. Caleb knew the sound before he saw the truck. Roy Harlan's engine knocked whenever it idled, a harsh, uneven sound like a cough that never cleared. Roy climbed out, hat low, mouth set hard. There you are, he called. Caleb felt the barn tilt beneath him. Ruth stepped slightly in front of him. You know this man? Caleb nodded once. Roy Harlan. Roy looked at Ellis first, then Dr. Keller, then Ruth, measuring the scene. Boy wandered off, Roy said. We've been worried sick. Caleb stared at him. No one spoke. Roy's smile thinned. Get your things, Caleb. The name sounded wrong in his mouth. He didn't wander off, Ruth said. Roy looked at her. And you are? Ruth Bell. That doesn't answer what right you have keeping a county placement in a burned barn. I didn't keep him. I found him after he had been put out. Roy's face hardened. Careful. Caleb felt every old habit rise in him. Say yes, sir. Look down. Make yourself less trouble. Survive the moment and pay later. Mabel gave a low bleat behind him. The sound steadied him. Roy pointed toward the truck. Now. Caleb's mouth went dry, but he did not move. If I have to leave, he said, I'll leave. Ruth turned toward him sharply. Caleb kept his eyes on Roy, though his hands were shaking. But Mabel can't go to auction. She's still weak. Her leg's bad. She needs clean water and dry bedding. She didn't do anything wrong. Roy gave a short, ugly laugh. You're making demands over a goat? No, sir. I'm asking for her to be safe. Ellis looked impatient. This is exactly why children shouldn't be involved in property matters. Dr. Keller closed the notebook. Property matters, he said quietly, are what people call living things when they want to stop feeling responsible. Ellis looked at him. Doctor, with respect, I'm not finished. Dr. Keller turned to Roy. Did you report the boy missing? Roy's jaw tightened. County woman comes next week, Caleb said softly. He said he'd tell her I ran off. Roy's eyes cut to him. Ruth heard it. So did Ellis. So did Dr. Keller. The morning went very still. Roy took one step forward. You ungrateful little... Ruth moved before he finished. She did not shout. She simply placed herself fully between Roy and Caleb. That will be enough. Something in her voice changed the air. Roy stopped. Ruth looked at Ellis. No one removes that goat today. No one tears down that barn today. And no one takes that boy back to a house that packed his sack and closed the door behind him. Ellis shook his head. Ruth, you can't just declare, I can call the county myself. I can call the sheriff about an abandoned child. I can call the bank and ask why livestock was left on property they claim to manage. And I can call every woman in town who still remembers what the Burnett farm meant before men with clipboards started calling it dirt. Ellis's mouth closed. For a few seconds, the only sound was wind moving through the broken roof. Dr. Keller tucked the notebook under his arm. I'll write a statement on the goat's condition. Moving her now would be irresponsible. And the boy? Ellis asked. Dr. Keller looked at Caleb, then at Ruth. The boy needs a lawful place before nightfall. Ruth's face did not change, but Caleb saw her swallow. Roy pointed toward Caleb. He belongs with county. He belongs somewhere safe, Ruth said. Caleb looked at her then. Not because she had promised him anything. She had not. But because for the first time all day, an adult had spoken about where he belonged as if the answer mattered. Ellis snapped his clipboard shut. I'll delay the clearing 48 hours. That's all I can promise. Make it a week, Dr. Keller said. 48 hours. Ruth's eyes stayed on Ellis. A week, she said. Ellis looked from Ruth to Dr. Keller to Roy. Then finally to Caleb standing beside the goat with soot on his sleeves and a cut wrapped in flour sack cloth. 3 days, Ellis said. After that, this becomes someone else's problem. He turned and walked back to his truck. Roy did not move at first. Then he looked at Caleb with cold honesty. You think she'll keep you? He said. People get tired of strays. Caleb flinched, but Ruth answered before he could. Some of us know the difference between a stray and someone who was left. Roy's face darkened. He climbed into his truck and backed hard down the lane. When both vehicles had gone, the yard felt strangely larger. Caleb stood very still. Ruth turned away from him and looked at the barn, then at Mabel, then at the old notebook in Dr. Keller's hand. Her face had gone pale. Dr. Keller's voice softened. Ruth, he said, there's something you ought to tell the boy before this goes further. Ruth closed her eyes. Caleb waited, feeling the whole morning balance on that sentence. Dr. Keller looked toward Mabel's stall. That goat isn't just some animal left behind after the fire. Ruth opened her eyes then, and in them Caleb saw grief so old it had learned to stand upright. Ruth did not speak at first. She stood in the burned yard with her hands at her sides, staring toward Mabel's stall as if the old barn had become a door she had spent years refusing to open. Caleb waited. He had learned that grown-ups often filled silence with orders. Ruth did not. Her silence was different. It carried weight, not anger. Dr. Keller held the Burnett notebook against his chest. Tell him, he said gently. Ruth took one slow breath. My son's name was Matthew, she said. The name seemed to change her face. It softened something and broke something at the same time. He used to come here when the Burnetts still had the dairy goats. Mrs. Burnett let him help after school. He was sickly when he was little. Couldn't run like other boys. But with animals, she looked down. With animals, he forgot he was weak. Caleb listened without moving. Ruth's eyes went to the stall. There was a little white-faced kid in the herd. Smallest one born that spring, stubborn. Wouldn't feed right unless Matthew warmed the mash himself. Mabel, Caleb said. Ruth nodded. He named her. Said she looked like she had more sense than most people. A faint smile came and went. Then Ruth's voice lowered. After Matthew died, I stopped coming here. Mrs. Burnett got sick not long after. Her husband tried to keep the place going, but grief makes poor workers of people. Then came the fire. By the time I heard what happened, Mr. Burnett had left town. Folks said all the animals were gone. She looked at Caleb then. I wanted to check. I told myself I would. Tomorrow, then the next day, then after the weather cleared. But I never came. The words fell hard. Caleb understood before she finished. Not the details, but the shape of it. A person could stay away from a place not because it meant nothing, but because it meant too much. Ruth's eyes shone, though no tears fell. All these years, I thought I was done with that barn. Then I saw you out here in the rain, laying your only shirt over a goat I was too afraid to look for. Caleb looked back at Mabel. She stood quietly in her stall, alive because someone had finally opened a door. I didn't know, he said. That's why it mattered, Ruth answered. You didn't know what she meant to me. You helped her anyway. Dr. Keller closed the notebook. The bank can talk about clearing land, he said. Roy Harlan can talk about county rules. But I'll put my name to one thing. That goat is standing because of the boy. Ruth turned to Caleb. And I'll put my name to another. You are not going back to the Harlans. The words frightened him more than he expected. Not because he wanted to go back. He did not. But a promise from an adult was a dangerous thing to believe too quickly. What if county says I have to? He asked. Then I'll speak to them. What if they say you can't? Then I'll ask what I need to do until they can't say it anymore. Caleb stared at her. Ruth looked almost annoyed by how much she meant it. I'm old, she said. Not dead. And I have a clean room, a table, and enough stubbornness left to bother an office for as long as it takes. Dr. Keller gave a small cough that might have been a laugh. That afternoon, Ruth made the calls. She did not let Caleb stand beside her while she spoke. She told him to check Mabel's bedding and fetch water from the well, because waiting was harder when hands had nothing honest to do. So Caleb worked. He cleaned the stall. He brushed Mabel's coat. He set the tin cup on a shelf and washed it twice, though it was already clean. Every sound from Ruth's house made him look toward the field. Near sunset, she came back with Dr. Keller beside her. County will come tomorrow, Ruth said. Not to take you back tonight. Keller spoke with them too. You'll sleep under my roof until things are settled. Caleb looked toward the barn. Mabel will stay here tonight. We'll check her before dark and again in the morning. But the barn won't fall in one night because you step away from it. He did not move. Ruth softened. Caleb, you kept her alive when no one asked you to. That does not mean you have to sleep in ashes forever. The sentence went through him slowly. Sleep in ashes. He looked at the burned beams, the patched tin, the swept floor around Mabel's stall. He had made it better, but better was not the same as safe. Mabel lifted her head and gave a low sound. Ruth picked up the lantern. Come on. We'll make sure she's settled. Together, they checked the water, the hay, the bad leg, the latch on the stall door. Caleb touched Mabel's neck. I'll come back, he whispered. For once, the words did not feel like a goodbye. Ruth's house smelled of onion, stew, wood smoke, and soap. Caleb stood just inside the back door, unsure where to put his feet. The kitchen was plain, clean, and quiet. A round table sat near the window. 2 chairs faced each other, though one looked as if it had not been used in a long time. Ruth hung her coat. Wash up, she said, nodding toward the sink. Caleb scrubbed his hands until the water turned gray. Soot ran from the lines in his knuckles. The cut on his thumb stung. When he turned around, Ruth had set a bowl on the table. Not on the edge, not by the back step. At the table, Caleb remained standing. Ruth pulled out the unused chair with her foot. Sit before it gets cold. He sat carefully, as if the chair might change its mind. The stew was thick with potatoes, carrots, and pieces of beef. Caleb took one spoonful, then another. He ate slowly, but his hand shook. Ruth pretended not to see. After a while, she set a small piece of cornbread beside the bowl. Mabel's milk went into that, she said. Caleb looked up. Not much milk, Ruth added. Enough. He broke the cornbread in half. The first bite was warm and slightly sweet. Something inside him ached, so suddenly he had to stop chewing. His mother's handkerchief was still in his jacket pocket. He touched it under the table. For the first time since she died, Caleb felt that keeping her memory did not require staying lonely. The next day brought questions, papers, and people who spoke in careful voices. The county worker came before noon. Ruth answered plainly. Dr. Keller gave his statement. Ellis Pritchard returned, less certain than before, and found 3 women from town already standing in Ruth's yard with casseroles and opinions. By evening, the bank had agreed to delay the clearing while ownership and livestock matters were reviewed. Within a week, Ruth signed papers to lease the strip of land around the barn with an option to buy it cheap, because no one else wanted the trouble of a burned structure and an old goat. Ruth wanted the trouble. So did Caleb. Roy Harlan did not come back. The county did. But this time, when they asked Caleb where he had been sleeping, he did not have to point toward ash and broken boards. Ruth stood beside him and said the spare room was ready. Clean sheets, a dresser, a window facing the field. The woman from county looked at Caleb. And what do you want, Caleb? No one had asked him that in a long time. He looked at Ruth. Her expression said nothing soft, but her hands were clasped so tightly he could see the strain in her fingers. "I want to stay where I can work," Caleb said, "and go to school, and take care of Mabel." Ruth looked away toward the field. Dr. Keller smiled into his hat. Spring came slowly. The barn did not become beautiful all at once. It became safer, one repair at a time. Men from town came on Saturdays to brace the good wall. Someone donated tin for the roof. Ruth paid what she could, refused pity where she recognized it, and accepted help when Caleb reminded her that pride could rot just like wet hay. Mabel grew stronger. Her limp faded. Her coat cleaned. She began giving enough milk for a small jar each morning. Ruth used some for cornbread, some for soup, and once, when Caleb had earned good grades at school, for a little pudding that embarrassed him with happiness. The first time Caleb placed his mother's handkerchief in the dresser drawer of Ruth's spare room, he stood there with his hand on the knob for a long while. Nothing happened. No one threw it out. No one packed it into a sack. It stayed. That was how Caleb learned a room could hold proof that you belonged. By early summer, the Burnett barn no longer looked like a grave for forgotten things. It had a straightened door, clean straw, a patched roof, and a small sign Caleb painted himself. Mabel's stall. The letters were uneven. Ruth said they had character. One morning, Caleb stood in the barn doorway while sunlight spread across the field. Mabel nudged his elbow, impatient for breakfast. From Ruth's porch came the sound of a screen door opening. "Caleb," she called. He turned. Ruth stood there with a dish towel over one shoulder, the way mothers did in pictures in kitchens and memories that did not hurt as much anymore. "Breakfast is ready." For a moment, Caleb did not move. He looked back at the barn, the black beams still visible beneath new boards, the stall where Mabel had once lain too weak to stand, the floor he had cleared with bleeding hands. He had thought he found a place to keep a goat alive. But the truth was quieter and larger than that. He had found a place where his own life could begin again. Caleb patted Mabel's neck. "I'll be back," he said. Then he walked across the yard toward Ruth's house, not as a burden waiting to be measured, but as someone whose chair was already waiting at the table.